So how do you then really start working on the part of intimacy that is about touch? So I do the same thing. I give them prompt and reflections. So remember I said one of my favorite parts of Song of Solomon was, let me hear your voice. We actually know that if you can get couples to talk more about their intimacy, they will become more intimate in all of these other areas. Those areas will improve. So I've included these. By the way, if you want my slides, I can just send them to Joel. Joel, can you send them out to everybody? Okay, I will send you the slides, all right? All right, so now that we've talked about physical affection, let me touch on some other aspects. What is in bed with you? There might be a few things in bed with you. So this is from the movie The Story of Us, and they have a lot of conflict. This movie is conflict, sex, right? And so right here, they've just started having this really intimate conversation that starts to go a little wonky and a little more wonky. And then all of a sudden, her parents show up on one side, and their words are coming through her mouth, and his parents show up, and their words are coming through his mouth, right? There's a lot. It's so easy to go, will she, will he, when it comes to physical intimacy in marriage. But there's just a few more things that make it complicated. So I want to share some of those unique challenges that you might have in your marriages, being those in leadership of some form or in the ministry. You do have unique challenges. We've already somewhat tapped on it, so this is just a reminder. You're expected to know how to do it right and to be a perfect example of it. Others and yourself might think you're exempt from having those sexual difficulties, the lack of support, and the research, right? Okay, so that's what I already showed you. This is research based on the ministry world out there. But what about our fellowship? 15% said of our fellowship, of ministry people in our fellowship, I've struggled with significant marital issues related to my work in paid ministry. So that's 15% of this group, right? It's just important. It's not those people out there. It's us in here, right? 50%. I have experienced feelings of disconnection, distraction from personal family life related to my work in paid ministry. This was from the research done in Panama. I just wanted to show you the specifics about your marriages. We're having a hard time. Remember I said it's like a war between ministry life and marriage? So you're being honest, those of you who got to participate in that. What about pornography? 51% of male ministers, 18 to 29, struggled with pornography use. Okay, that's a lot. But look at the other numbers. 30 to 39. Is it about 32%? 40 to 49. No, that's not a percentage, by the way. That's about 25%. So those between 40 and 60, we're looking at about 20%. I was at a conference in our fellowship. One of the women said, can I talk to you? Her husband was an elder, and he deals with pornography, and there was nobody to talk to because if they talked about it, so he talked to her, super open with her, but not anybody else because it would affect his eldership. This is happening across the board in our ministries. When we talked to who was it who shared the 4 different kinds of friends? Tim did, right? We've got to have the relationships where we can talk openly and honestly about these things, okay? This isn't a bad you if this is what you're struggling with. This is, let's just talk about it, okay? This is happening. How do we turn it around, right? So, so this was the 50%, 13%. So what else? What are some of the needs for staff couples? One of the things that comes up, this is out of the work Mark Laser. I would actually say I'm pretty picky about the stuff I recommend for Christian books on sexuality because most of them are awful. But anything by the Lasers, Laaser, anything. I haven't read all of their books, but their work is really quality. And this is from their work. That one of the things that happens as far as staff couples is that there's not always teaching and help with having integrity with sexuality, personal wholeness, balance. So we're going to hear the word rhythms later. I like that better than the word balance. And how do we have purity of thought and conduct? How about relationships? Are they emotionally safe in the marriage environment where you can, between the two of you, have that dialogue that we just practiced? About the deepest vulnerabilities, there's that word in longings. Also, there's not always really healthy boundaries. So that's that mutual sense of adventure and discovery, but also the ability to say, that doesn't work for me. I don't want to do that. Having healthy boundaries. And then we have this is what a male is, and this is what a female is. But strong lines. That's not helping our ministries. It's not helping our ministries. It's not helping our ministries. If you have a female that might enjoy something we typically, or just is in character, something like we more typically think of as male, or a male, meaning some of the men in this room, that might enjoy things or be certain ways in their character that is more like we would think of as a female. Those lines are not from God, they're from our culture. And we really need to examine how sexual gender stereotypes and the cultural expectations those sometimes come from are affecting you in your marriages. And then definitely, if you have early experiences of your own, of sexual abuse, sexual molestation, harmful sexual relationships, they have impacted your sexual responding, how your body does sexually. And so how do you, like if you, right now I have multiple people in my office that are started pornography when they were 8 or 10, and they're now in their mid-20s, right? So we know this is happening, and now they're getting married. So I have them, they're young marrieds, or they're engaged, or they come to see me like they're 30s, 35s, and they have that same 15 years of pornography and masturbation. Well, there's a certain amount of conditioning that's happened to sexual responding, and how do we help with that instead of just saying, don't do that, like that's helpful, don't do that. There is a relearning that often has to happen because then the sexual arousal is attached to all of that stuff that happened there. So instead of shaming it, how about we talk about it openly and get the help that we need? In other words, so that my interest in arousal is connected to the partner that I have and not by either some of the painful things I've gone through or some of the pornography things that I've looked at through the years. And so how do we train you guys, staff, providing sexual education, teaching biblical sexual ethics, and having sexual integrity? We need to have these kinds of open conversations in our ministries. The specific kinds of sins that will come up is that there's this difficult balance between guarding sexual integrity and promoting sexual maturity. Because those two things will often look like they're in opposition. If I guard my sexual integrity, I'm not supposed to be doing those things like pornography. But then if I'm going to really mature sexually, that means I have to talk about the fact that I'm struggling with my sexual integrity. So to get to the mature thing, that means I need help with the integrity thing, right? So honestly, one of the biggest things I get asked is, Jennifer, what would you say in our churches needs to happen around sexuality? And I said, we need to start talking about it openly and honestly. It needs to start within our families. Within our movement, you really don't have parents who know how to yet talk to their children about sex. I have a whole workshop I do on how to teach your children about sex. I've actually had that workshop. I've taught it probably 3 times. That workshop should be happening in all of our churches over and over and over again, starting in the families. And then how do we talk about it openly in our singles ministries? You know, the first time people talk about sexuality is the week before they get married. Like, what the heck? I just did a workshop with all of these singles. No, it was the whole church. And I said, raise your hands. It was fun because it was all electronic. Raise your hands if you've read Song of Solomon and you're single. It was about 1/10. They should be reading they're watching all this other stuff on TV and movies. Maybe we should read God's plan, right? So it starts earlier, but it shows up in your marriages right now. How well do you know Song of Solomon? The Bible is the only world religion text that has a whole book devoted to sensuality and sexuality. God is sex positive. I don't have a ton of scriptures because I had such short time in this, but let me tell you, if you want to read more about all that or listen more to it, you can go on my website. But what makes the challenge of finding out how to have both of these things, the isolation? Your isolation makes it hard to have both integrity and maturity. And all honesty, too, you're leaders. And so some of you struggle with narcissism. I don't mean you're narcissistic. I just think we can often, when we're in a leadership position, I get asked this a lot, because people in positions of power will do things wrong sexually and think that the rules don't apply to them. So if that's your case, get help with that now so it doesn't destroy your marriage, your ministry, right? If you have trauma, sexually especially, from your childhood, I get asked, when should I go get help? Today. Sexual trauma has really lifelong impacts. What Kyle said about you're harmed at 5 and you're just talking about it at 55 is exactly what's happening in my office. They're crying and they're 65 years old about something then because they didn't have the opportunity or didn't take advantage of the opportunity to go get help in the earlier years. And then definitely, if there are painful things happening in your marriage and resentments build up, those unresolved resentments can absolutely impact. If you tend more towards authoritarian leadership, it can actually keep you emotionally and spiritually immature. If that's the case, you can change that and grow in that, like immensely. Actually, that's why I like the lasers work, because they talk about the iceberg. The ice that's above the water is only a part of yourself. There's this huge chunk underneath the water that we need to grow in, all those other parts of ourselves, including our background. What if in your marriage you've had betrayals occur and trust has been broken in your marriage? Let me just share with you some of the very basic things that I walk people through. If there have been affairs or any use of pornography, how did the discovery go? This is and how did then the process of healing go? This is what we tend to do in our fellowship. Good job. You forgave her, and we go on. Good job, you forgave him, and we go on. And then they're in my office 15 or 20 years later. That's literally the case. I worked with a couple that are your spiritual siblings. The affair actually happened before they became Christians. Patted on the back for forgiving their spouse when they became Christians, and that's the last time it was ever discussed. They came in, they were leaders doing awesome work. They gave me permission to share their story. I don't share their names. They lead a group. They're happy in their marriage. Things are going well. Their kids are disciples. So they came because it was cheap to be a part of a sex therapy study I was doing. So that's why they came. They're like, free therapy, cool. The amount of healing they went through was so cool to be a part of. They hadn't actually resolved that she found a poem where he wrote about kissing the woman. That happened 25 years ago. He didn't know that the kissing had never picked back up in their marriage because that part was still painful, and they'd never talked about it, and that was just one of many pieces. So have we actually healed some of the wounds from some of the damage that's happened and the trust that's been broken? What happens is, Kyle talked about it earlier, the word attachment. The attachment gets damaged in the marriage, and often just we plow forward. We're doing cool ministry things. The song by, it's called Broken Together by Casting Crowns. Am I saying that right? Just does a beautiful job of talking about how we were doing all these spiritual dreams together, but we left us behind. It's really vital that if there's injury to your marriage, that you take the time to work through the damage to that attachment bond, to the trauma. This is what we tend to do with trauma. Will you ever let this go? Come on, you're supposed to forgive. You're still holding this against me? Trauma that happens in the attachment relationship will come up, and instead of are you holding a record of wrongs and not forgiving and, deflecting and blaming and minimizing, how about we do this? Your spouse sees you pick up your phone and is reminded of all of the pornography that's happened. And you say, and they share it with you, and you say, oh, right. When I picked up my phone, you got flooded with everything that happened. That makes sense. I did that. And so right now, just you seeing me do that brings it all back. Thank you for sharing that with me. I did that to you, and it makes sense to me that it would still come up for you. Anytime that happens for you, I'd like you to share it with me. I'm really glad you're sharing it with me right now. Is there anything that you need from me? Do you need to see my phone? Do you need me to tell you how I'm doing in my recovery in my use of pornography. Do you just need me to hug you? Do you just need me to listen? That's what I call the healing conversation. That's what should be happening for you guys, not the people in your ministry, in your marriages. Your betrayals and broken trusts might not be around sexuality. It might be about a different area of your life, but this is the conversation that I guide couples through. It's a horrible mnemonic, RVOG. My other mnemonics are much more interesting. But it's a healing way to really work through things. What are some other ways? Spiritual recovery is huge. I love this. This is actually from the book Sex and the Supremacy of Christ by, it's out of my brain. To those for whom sexual experience has resulted in unholy pain, Christ says, I understand well your experience. I hear the cry of the needy, afflicted, and broken. Come to me. I am your refuge. I am safe. I will remake what is broken. I will give you reason to trust and then to love. I will remake your joy. This is from several different scriptures. This is the power of God. That in brokenness, he can bring about huge changes. So how do you rebuild and renew? I put both of those in here because some of you might be rebuilding after brokenness, or some of you just feel like we're needing some renewal in our marriage to really help things even be better than they've been. So this is actually, there we go. How do we talk more about the sensual and sexual parts of our relationship? Again, Song of Solomon shows us how. I love this. So she's describing him. So the wife is describing the beloved is describing the lover and says, she calls him handsome and lover and delight to sit in his shade, that he's sweet to taste. She calls him radiant, ruddy, and outstanding. She compliments, watch what she compliments, his head, his hair, his cheeks, his lips, his muscles, she calls them arms of gold. His body, she says it's polished ivory. That his legs are pillars of marble. She compliments his mouth and calls their bed verdant. What does he say? He calls her beautiful, lovely. He says, you've stolen my heart with a glance. He calls her delightful, pleasing. Look what he compliments physically. Pay attention to this. Breasts are in there. Eyes, hair, teeth, lips, mouth, temples, neck, breasts, navel, waist. How are we doing at complimenting each other's bodies physically in our marital relationship? He compliments her smell. He says her breath is like apples, and then he says her voice is sweet. And I love this. He compliments her sandaled feet. Okay, when's the last time, guys? Come on, compliment her sandaled feet. Okay, what I really love, the lover makes her jewelry. Freebie, that's not in the slides. I mean, just there's so many generous, sweet things between the two of them in Song of Solomon. Yeah, graceful legs. The way he admires her is so poetic. He calls her like the dawn, fair as the moon, bright as the sun, and majestic as the stars. We have a whole book on how to have intimacy. You might not be naturally poetic, but God is. And he's who we get to imitate, right? You can learn it. We're called disciples for a reason. It means learner, right? In all areas. So how do we improve in not just our sensual talk, which is what I just talked about, but in our sensual touch? What does it say in Song of Solomon? So of the beloved, literally the physical parts of the body and the way they sensually touch is mentioned. Your lips, your neck, your navel, how beautiful you are. The lover says his arms, his legs, his mouth, he is altogether lovely. So my favorite term in all of it is the blow on my garden. So for those of you who are not married, we're not really quite sure what this refers to. It could be the whole Jesus in the church thing, but I don't think that's completely true. Just saying. Because what it says is he browses the garden, and then he climbs the palm tree, and what does he grasp? Her breasts. The garden is probably her vulva, Probably her sexuality. What did somebody say earlier? Her private spots. Okay, I'm going to say the word, her clitoris, her vulva, her vagina. That's probably what it's talking about when he's browsing the garden. So hence, that's kind of funny, the whole blow on her garden. Okay, what does that mean? Is that sensual and sexual touch has to be talked about. For those of you who aren't in a married relationship, you get to learn it now, that it's going to be important for you. I'm going to throw somebody under the bus. So Guy Hammond, remarried, love Laura. He took my cards, which are for sale back there, on the honeymoon, and it has 3 decks. 2 of them are for overall marital intimacy. 1 of them is for touch and sensual touch, and the 4th and 5th deck are on sexuality. He brought the sexuality deck on his honeymoon. I'm like, Guy, seriously? No. The first 2 decks. But at the same time, yes, because we often don't know how to talk about sensuality and sexuality. Let me hear your voice out of Song of Solomon is huge. Yes, do the relationship work first. Remember the green slide earlier that said, touch her soul before you touch her body. Do that relationship work with greater touch and affection. Meaning, one of the biggest things that comes in for couples is that they say, he only, it's often a he, but it can be the other way around as well. He only touches me, he's only affectionate when I get the clue he's trying to say, hey, let's. So we have to change that dynamic in each marriage by starting with talking about it. Do good conflict resolution, use that validation reflection piece. How well is the playfulness going? This is the adventuring, but also the playfulness in bed. In your bedroom, kick the parents off the bed from the picture earlier. And when's the last time you did silly, fun, goofy things in your bedroom? So playfulness both inside and outside of the bedroom. And then how are you doing at talking more and having more intimate conversations? So that's the heart-to-heart as well as the sexuality. And sensual touch without sex. Exploring. So in my research, I ran a couple research studies. This one, couples who engage in sensual foreplay, the level of overall enjoyment of sex increases dramatically. Let me read that again. Couples who engage in sensual foreplay, the level of overall enjoyment of sex increases dramatically. All right? Where the focus of enjoyment is no longer just the orgasm. There's the O word. We said it twice. So what do we say? Soulgasm? There we go. I just said orgasm. The O word, but the arousing pleasure of giving and receiving increasingly intimate touches. So if the whole focus is orgasmic response, true intimacy gets missed. And this is the phrase, we hold hands, we kiss and hello and goodbye, and we hug and we have sex, but not much in between. So oral sex is really important. And that's not what I meant by putting that in there. What I actually meant was orally talking about sex. So the more you talk about that heart-to-heart stuff that we practiced earlier, the better talking about sex will go. Men, from one research study, this is an old research study, they said that emotional expression and sexual contact is how they experienced deep intimacy. I would say it's actually when emotional expression happens in the midst of sexual contact. That means that both people are mutually there and really having a good time, and they're talking openly, even in the midst of engaging sexually. So we need to learn to verbalize. God has a great plan for sex. And that verbalization needs to happen before and during and after. So we can have a mutually fulfilling sexual activity in our marriages. I want to really emphasize that word there, mutually. I was at a shower a couple years ago for a couple for her. It was an intimate shower for the woman who was getting married. And they actually just had me there so I could give advice. I actually didn't know her that well. Like, sure, I'll give advice. And I said, so I gave my gift, and then everybody was sharing, and I said, the biggest thing I would say to you is prioritize your own enjoyment. Women don't actually focus on their own enjoyment and make it it's just about him and his needs. It's actually one of the killers to good intimacy in marriage. It needs to be mutually fulfilling sexual activity. So let's make sure that we're all practicing Let Me Hear Your Voice. It's been great to be with you.